Britain was once a difficult country to cross. Roads were few and paths obscure. And yet our ancestors travelled, for work and for pleasure, for faith and for fortune. But the routes that they followed are lost. I'm going to rediscover them, and the people who took them, what they saw and why they travelled, who they met and where they went. I'm following the forgotten routes that made this country great. And this week, I'm in Scotland. I'm here to explore a route that provided one of this country's greatest exports.
Come to your Orkney's fillet stick. Enjoy dinner.
Thank you. Beef. And what is the best beef? Scotch beef. But the journey that this meat has made to that world-renowned status is not only the history of Scotland, but also the history of the way that the rest of the world perceives Scotland. And it's a journey that's well worth taking. So, come with me and join one of the teams that drove vast herds of cattle from the islands and highlands of Scotland down to the lowland towns. Many were bound ultimately for the greatest market of them all in Smithfield in London, so that meat could be put on the plate of the great British beef eater. Droving has left us with quite a cultural legacy, as well as a network of lost drovers' roads that snaked across Britain. I'm going to follow one of these ancient routes from the northwest of Skye, through a maze of trackways that crisscross the Highlands and down into what was once Scotland's greatest cattle market at Falkirk. Together with 4 beautiful Highland cattle, I'm going back to the 1800s, when droving was at its height. When drovers swam their cows across vast stretches of water.
That's a first for me, herding cows by boat.
Braved precarious mountain passes and led their herds straight through the heart of the town. By the end of the journey, I want to discover how the Highland drover became the original cowboy of the American Wild West. Scotland has almost 800 islands. Skye is amongst the biggest, and it's topped by one of the most forbidding mountain ranges in Britain, the Coolin. Nonetheless, by 1800, people had been herding, raising, and living off their cattle in this place for 3,000 years. And every year, they faced the same dilemma.
It's the beginning of October, and the weather is coming in. And if I'd lived here on the extremities of the British Isles about 200 years ago, this is the time when I'd be trying to bring my cattle down from the hills. Come on. Come on.
And that's easier said than done.
This way.
But there will be no pasture on the high tops in winter.
Stay there. Come on.
In the Stone Age, the ancestors of the people who lived here would have actually worshipped these beasts. Now, these cows are precious, a 4-legged currency, and difficult to deal with.
What happens is I have to gather them together because there won't be enough feed during the winter to keep them down around the farm. Some of them are going to have to go to market, and that's about 200 miles in that direction. And so begins one of the great annual migrations in Britain. Come on here, come on!
And there are no lorries and no trains. They will have to transport themselves by walking.
Come on!
As will Rory Ormiston, the owner of these thoroughbred Highlanders. Unlike his novice assistant, Rory knows how to get his cattle to do what he wants. It's called cattle nuts.
That's the way to do it. You don't need to do all the running about. They'll come to you.
Okay. I think I've got a bit to learn, Rory, haven't I?
It's called bribery. This is my father, Cameron.
Yeah, Cameron, hi.
How are you? Good.
Are you coming with us?
I'm hoping to.
Good. Cameron, I hope you don't mind me asking this. How old are you?
I'm not really sure myself.
Are you not?
Of course he is. I happen to know that Cameron is 82 and pretty determined with it.
Come on.
And we're off, hoping to retrace the still just visible signs of the old drovers' roads for 240 miles, across dirt tracks, mountain paths, and even public roads. We've got just 4 cows with us: Orny, Frosty, Claire, and the matriarch of our group, Sidonia.
Come on. Come on.
And the first thing that I learn is that this is no giddy stampede.
Come on.
The drover covered about 15 miles a day, a leisurely stroll. Enough to permit the cattle to graze on the way, because they needed to be fattened for market, not worn down by the journey. Back in 1800, this drove from Skye to Falkirk would have taken us 2 to 3 weeks. These were not the fittest of cows that went either. Unlike today's young beef, in 1800 it was the oldest and the weakest that was sent. Not excluding myself.
It's a painstaking business. Who'd have thought it, eh? You think you're just going to go for a walk, and somehow the cows will walk with you. But in fact, the cows have their own agenda. Munch, munch, munch. Okay, I'll walk another few steps. Munch, munch, munch. All right, okay, all right. Oh, well, if you like, okay. No, I'm going in the other direction. Just goes on. It's continuous. All day long. It's wearing me out, honestly.
Well, no, not really. Crossing the breadth of Skye, we at last reach the point where the drove road from the west converges with the one from the east. We are driving our own beasts, but back in 1800, droving tended to be carried out by specialist, tough, canny businessmen. The small farmers on Skye would be expected to give a proportion of their livestock up to the laird as rent for their land, and so it was often the laird himself who'd hire a man to get the lot down south. By the time he reached this bridge, the drover might have accumulated anything up to 100 cattle from various different sources. But it would have been like Hyde Park Corner around here.
Come on. Come on. It's the walking coach rack. I haven't quite got used to yet with the idea. Whoa. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. And I haven't got my cow call quite worked out yet. You know what I mean? I mean, you need a yodel or a yippee whoop hey. We're in Sligachen now, where there was a tryst, or a special market, established in 1794 by MacLeod of MacLeod. But it's also a stance. It's a place where people stayed for the night.
A stance was a sheltered area of grazing land that was recognised as a place where drovers could break camp and graze their cattle. In the 19th century, before the arrival of modern breeding techniques, cattle were at least 40% smaller than they are today. Not much bigger than sheep, in fact. I'll catch up with the girls a little later. I've realised I'm not really prepared for this dreich Highland weather, so I've made a bit of a detour to Portree, the main town on Skye, to find something suitable. Back in 1800, they didn't believe in fussing around with anything too tailored.
I've been given this. It's a phillamore, or great kilt.
And effectively, a man on a drove would have taken with him little more than 6 to 9 yards of woolly cloth. The oil in the cloth would have formed a sort of wetsuit. In fact, when we wake up in the morning, he was enjoined to rub it in the dew until it was nice and damp, then hold it over the fire and he got a bit of warmth in him, and then basically start wrapping himself in it. It's the sort of granddaddy of those skirts, highly coloured skirts that we see accountants wearing in Brisbane on Burns night.
But of course, many of those Australians, and Americans too for that matter, have a genuine claim to wearing the tartan, so rooted in the history of these cattle lands. 200 years ago, the population here was 5 times what it is today. That was until tens of thousands of crofters were forced off the land by the lairds who wanted to replace them and their cows with lucrative sheep farming. These were the infamous Highland clearances. Many crofters and drovers chose to emigrate rather than starve, taking their cattle ranching skills with them to the 4 corners of the globe. For us, today, the journey is not so great.
Walk this way, please.
But it does have its own problems.
We've come to one of our first major obstacles, and that's a stretch of water to get ourselves across to the mainland. I've been sent ahead, in fact, to try and stop them jumping into the ocean on either side.
To get to the mainland, drovers brought their cattle to Kyle Ray, where the passage across the sea is at its narrowest. But this ferry service has only been operating since 1934. Cattle can get spooked by the sound of their own hooves on hollow surfaces, such as wood or metal, which is one of the reasons I think they're reluctant to get on board.
Here we go, Griff, try that.
Yes, cattle nuts. Generally the answer to all our prayers, but not in Sidonia's case. She just doesn't want to get on board.
Where's she gone? You get up there. Oh, she's gone right behind her. Come on. Come on. Stop her going that way.
This has become more like Pamplona than the Inner Hebrides. We're talking about 1,200 pounds of angry beef with horns attached. But with a little sweet talking, we overcome her reservations. Back in 1800, the only way the drovers could get their cattle over this fast-moving channel was to force them to swim. 6,000 cows were coaxed across Kyle Ray every autumn. But because of the strong current, not all of them survived. I've come to find out how it was done from Hugh, the skipper.
Well, they'd have taken a calf across initially in maybe a small rowing boat or something like that, and then they'd have tethered it the other side to where the cattle were, and they'd have let mum in, and they'd have probably prodded the calf a bit to make it bleat, moo, and mum would have heard it, and of course that bond is very strong, so she'd have swum across. This is no joke to get them across here. No joke.
Cattle swimming may be no joke, but there's one place in Skye where it still goes on. Little Staffin Island lies just off the north coast, and somehow local farmer Ian MacDonald swims his entire herd of cattle over to the island to graze on the pasture every October. The cattle are stampeded down the beach, there's a big shelf just off the shore, and suddenly they're all in deep water. They may all look as if they're swimming for their lives, but they're keeping their heads above water and swimming for their lunch. Ian has been driving his cattle back and forth to Staffin Island for 62 of his 80 years. His only concession to age is that he now conducts proceedings from a boat, when he actually used to swim alongside the cows in the sea.
today we're lucky, it's quite calm.
Oh yes, I was very lucky, yes.
But it can be pretty...
Oh, yes, yes. Could be. I've seen we had bullocks and I've seen them coming ashore way out there. They come up on their own and oh...
What, they just swim away or
yes,
get carried away
yes.
by the current?
In 1800, even when cattle were transported in boats, as they often were from the Outer Hebrides, they were usually thrown off about a half a mile away from the shore just to give them a good wash. But our ladies step on dry land, safe and happy. We're on the mainland, and now we're following the northernmost of two drovers' routes, down through Glen Shiel to Cluny, where we hope to make use of a short cut. We're imagining our journey is taking place on the cusp of the industrial age. Before the coming of chemical fertilizers and improved agriculture, land was scarce and yielded little. Geography determined what was farmed. All the hills and mountains to the west of Britain were cattle country then.
Well done.
Cattle were one of the few forms of food that delivered themselves to market. But as demand for beef in Scotland and England increased, any advancements of the burgeoning industrial age that could be adapted to speed the progress of the drover were grasped with vigour.
We're actually on a trackway that was built at huge expense on top of this boggy ground in order to provide a shortcut for drovers. And it cut about 3 days off the journey. And it was all part of a giant scheme designed to bring improvement to the Highlands, which was surveyed and organised by Thomas Telford.
Telford was one of Scotland's greatest engineers. He understood the significance of the drover to the Highland economy, and he determined to speed their passage where he could.
Come on, girlies.
I like it when they hunker down into the wind. They just sort of let their shoulders drop a little bit.
I think we should be joining them the way it is today.
Before this road was built, drovers travelling along Glen Shiel were forced to take a longer route through the centre of the country. But Thomas Telford saw an opportunity to forge a shortcut through Glen Loyne, which would connect the drover to a more direct route to Falkirk.
I just can't help noticing that our wonderful road is coming to a direct halt ahead of us.
It looks a bit wet, doesn't it?
I can see it, look, it actually goes on the other side of the loch over there.
Either it's rained a lot more than any of us had thought, or something has happened to change the landscape around here. Thankfully, there's somebody to ask. Professor Roland Paxton can often be found knocking about in this region. He's an expert on the history of Scotland's great engineering achievements, and for him, Telford's forgotten road is nirvana, even if it's disintegrating by the minute.
The last time the road was to be used was before the Loch Loyne was flooded by the hydroelectric people in the 1950s.
Right.
Until that time, this road could be in regular use.
Right. So, in other words, a project to improve the Highlands finally wiped out an earlier project to improve the Highlands.
You could say that.
I just have.
The old map shows that by the 1930s, Telford's Drovers Road had become the A87. In other words, the main road for motor traffic from Glasgow to the Isle of Skye. Back in those days, Loch Loyne was two small separate lochs connected by a river, and this was the bridge that carried that road over that river. The bridge and the road are still down there somewhere, submerged by billions of gallons of water, and making the odd appearance when summer droughts drain the loch. Thomas Telford's pioneering Drovers Road of the 19th century, turned A road for motor cars in the 20th century, is now a disused track and stands as an epitaph to an economy built on beef. But the weather is fit for neither man, nor beast, nor professor. Roland invites me to shelter in the back of his car.
So, Roland, tell me a little bit about Thomas Telford.
It has been said, and I wouldn't disagree with the fact that Telford's improvements have advanced civilization in Scotland by 100 years.
How many miles of roads did he build in the Highlands in the end?
Well, 1,100 miles of roads and about the same number of bridges too, which is a very remarkable achievement.
Why was this drove route seen as being of such importance?
Well, because of the actual patronage of the route. It is taking something like 20 to 30,000 beasts a year.
It's certainly difficult to imagine such vast numbers of cattle passing through this deserted glen today. We have to turn back. We've got to find a way to reconnect with the road on the other side of the loch. But I'm noticing the girls don't seem to love these hard surfaces.
Is this road too solid for them, though?
I think it probably was. Their feet would wear out quite quickly on a surface like this. That's why we keep seeing them going to either side and walking in the grass.
Telford's road speeded the passage of the drover, but wore down the hooves of the cattle that walked them. Luckily, there was a solution available. After mobile farrier Robin Papers finished an emergency replacement of Rhys' horse's shoe, I grabbed the opportunity to ask Robin how they dealt with cattle.
What I understand is that you used to take a horseshoe from south, cut it in half, which then gave you two halves, like that, and then they used to draw down the area of the toe and fold it up like a clip. Now, given that a horse's foot, as you appreciate, as we've seen, is one unit, it's a single unit. A cow's foot operates in two halves. It's a cloven-footed animal. So the way that I understand, the way that these are made, I understand that this would need a little bit of adjustment, but it would go on very similar to that.
Right.
And that would be it.
Okay, but a fiddly job.
Quite a fiddly job, and but I suppose, like anything else, if you're used to it, and if you were brought up doing it, it was an accepted part of your yearly work.
Yes, but Sidonia isn't used to it, and who can blame her? In order to be shod, cattle had to be thrown onto their back with their head held down and the legs trussed up with a rope. Imagine doing that with 20 to 30,000 beasts. We found the perfect stance near the shores of Loch Arkaig. The horses have been hobbled to stop them wandering off. The cattle are settling down after suffering bouts of homesickness during the first couple of days. And under Cameron's guidance, it's my turn to cook. Yes, porridge again. Oats happen to be one of the few crops that could be grown in these regions during the short, wet summers.
Right.
Aye.
And no milk?
Well, if you can catch the coo to milk it, you'll be lucky.
The thing about it is, you only have the porridge when you stop at night or first thing in the morning, and you've got the fire to do it. You can go most of the day with nothing else, except a good decent dram.
A bit of whiskey from now on to get beat out the cold.
Uskapé.
The water of life.
Aye, the water of life.
Good.
When the locals needed extra protein, they would actually cut their live cattle and add the blood to their porridge.
Need some salt there.
Yeah, definitely.
And this meal was the origin of black pudding, another great and famous Scottish delicacy. I've made a detour. Having tasted the drover's life for a few days now, I'm curious to understand why Scotch beef developed the reputation it did. Butcher George McRae is going to tell me.
So we've got the fillet of beef here, by far the most expensive cut and the most tender cut in the animal, but not necessarily the most tasty. We go round onto the sirloin, and that's the most popular steak. And then down on the far end, down to the best part, the rump. That's my favourite.
I would have thought, you know, in a funny sort of way, that if you're dealing with a tough old beast that can survive on the hillside, aren't you? Doesn't that result in tough meat?
The opposite. It's a very, as you say, tough old beast that is fantastically adapt to the area. The taste all comes from what you put into an animal. And up here in the Highlands, it's fresh air, clean water, no pollution, everything is as good as you can get. The grass quality up in the Highlands in the summertime is fantastic. It's the best grass in the world. The water quality is outstanding. I mean, the amount of it that comes down is quite a lot as well.
So, ironically, what gave Scottish beef its reputation is the very landscape that was always regarded as too poor and untamable to use for anything else. We've now travelled over 100 miles, and we're about to arrive at Achnacarry, the ancestral home of one of the most important clans in Scotland.
One of the things that I've been wondering, as we've been wandering, is what happens when we cross private land. We've been up on the moorland so far. Well, just ahead of us is Castle Achnacarry, ancient seat of the Clan Cameron. And I suppose they'll tell me.
Half of Scotland is still owned by just 500 families, and the Camerons of Achnacarry are one of them. They've been around since the 14th century. They fought at the Battle of Culloden, and their vast estate once included Ben Nevis, Britain's highest mountain. The Clan Cameron is big in these parts. I want to find out more about the laird's involvement in the cattle rearing business.
Hello. Hi.
Donald Cameron is an Edinburgh lawyer, but up here in the Highlands he's known as the Younger of Lochiel. As clan chief in waiting, I asked Donald to explain to me what exactly a clan is.
It comes from the Gaelic for children, and that's, I think, very fundamental to understanding what it is, because it's basically a family. And the system in Scotland, the clan system, was one where the chief was at the apex of this family. Everyone in the clan took his name, Cameron, for example, and owed him allegiance, and in return for that allegiance, he would protect them. There we are.
So, and if you came from Skye and you weren't a Cameron, when you came here, you thought, is it a wise idea to cross these lands with my cattle when cattle thieving is a sort of gentleman's occupation?
Right, absolutely. And people would think nothing of just lifting, as they say, lifting
a toll.
A toll of whoever it was.
Cattle thieving had been the drovers' greatest fear. But after their defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1745, the Scottish clans had the right to bear arms removed forever. And in fact, the only group of civilians permitted to continue to carry guns to protect themselves and their cattle were the drovers. Perhaps that was the reason that cattle lifting had gradually died out by the time we were coming through in 1800. Though I was interested to find out how deadly a drover might be. Bryden Ritchie from Vintage Arms Scotland has brought an 18th century government-issued musket for Donald and I to have a go with. It's a far more accurate weapon than the pistols that the drovers used, but how effective was it?
Because this is a military load, the ammunition would have been issued to the soldiers in the form of a cartridge, made of, straight as enough cartridge paper, with the ball in one end.
Is that the origin of the idea of a cartridge?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Gosh, okay.
In here we have black gunpowder. That would just get poured down the barrel like that, and then we just simply push the ball under. Very fine powder in the pan, like that. We then close the lid, and if you watch your chaps, if you put your ears on, and we're clear to fire, the hammer comes to full cock, and off we go.
Donald's stalking experience means that he's an ace shot. But I'm not sure how many stags he'd bag with this gun.
Underneath.
Me next.
are immediately failing the basic strength. Good. Now,
And then just shove it in. Good tap. Seat it well. That's it, sir. Put some priming powder into the pan. The expression, the flash in the pan, is where the powder charge in the pan goes off, and for some reason it doesn't go through to the barrel, so you get a flash in the pan, but nothing else.
right.
Back to full cock. Well in the shoulder. Waist on your front foot. Good
Well, I'm frightened that the rustlers might have got over the hill by now, but let's have a go.
Good shot, sir. High left.
Oh, yes.
High left is almost off the board. I think I'm going to need a little bit more practice if anyone wants to take Sidonia off me. We haven't been able to cover all of this journey on foot. Moving cattle across country is today subject to strict regulations to prevent the spread of diseases like foot and mouth.
All aboard.
And so Sidonia and the girls will have to travel sections of the drover's route in their trailer. We've got to cross the Great Glen. This is an enormous geological fault that cuts Scotland in half. It runs from Inverness in the north for more than 70 miles to Fort William in the south, and 80% of it is deep water lochs. Once we're on the other side, we need to cross the highest and most challenging mountain ranges we'll encounter in our entire journey. We're back on the trail with Ben Nevis behind us, and we've still got around 70 miles to go. And although the sun is shining at the moment, we're going to be descending into Glen Cove, which has a notorious reputation for bad weather, amongst other things. First, though, we've got to climb down the side of a mountain by a route with an ancient name, which was revived in the 20th century.
That's the Devil's Staircase down there, called by workers on the dam for the hydroelectric scheme up there. And they used to come up this path in order to get to the pub. And on the way back in the darkness, apparently, the devil claimed a fury.
The hairpin bends that give the Devil's Staircase its name make it easier to travel up and down this treacherous mountainside. It's a modern hiker's track now. But our cattle are finding this a bit of a struggle. Back in 1800, if they'd slipped and broken a leg, that would have been the end of them. But each disaster like that threatened to make the whole venture a loss-making enterprise.
The poor dears have got very sore feet on these very hard stones on the hiker's trail, so we've had to take great loops finding the old route down through the grass, but I think we're just about getting down. Onward, my darling, onward. Let us go to pastures new.
The much wider loops of the old drover's route that weave their way in and out of the tighter zigzags of the modern pathway can be seen as a much deeper green, and that's because the grass is still nourished by centuries of cow dung from deep below the surface. Cattle droving was a hard life, but it had its rewards. It was down to the skill of the drover to transport as many cattle as he reasonably could, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. If he got it right and didn't lose too many on the way, the drover could earn between £3 and £4 a week, which was around 4 times the average wage of an agricultural labourer at the time. We're in Glencoe, and the weather has turned. Luckily, though, 3 miles down the valley is an inn. This was the northernmost of a series of drover stops that ran at about 15-mile intervals all the way to Falkirk.
Well, there we are. That's a welcome sight, eh? That's the King's House. And for about 150 years, was known as the most miserable and wretched place in the Highlands. Come on, Zeno, come on. No, no, come on. Oh, round this way then. Come on, come on.
I think Zeno's heard about this place too. It got its name because it was maintained as a barracks. In the 18th century, they had to pay a man £9 a year just to keep the place open. Dorothy Wordsworth was an early middle-class tourist. She came here in 1803 and found it dirty, cold and miserable. But for drovers like us, the King's House represents the ultimate in luxury. Camma and I find it rather better than Dorothy did.
You'd always stop different places and let them...
I want to know how he thinks our drove is going.
They seem perfectly happy to follow.
Oh, yes. But the lead cow, she's the boss, and they know to follow her. Plus the fact of the ponies, or the horses as we called them in the old days. They were Highland horses. And they sort of build up a friendship amongst them. You can see even how the cows look at the horses and how they look at one another, you know.
See that? They were looking all the time to see what the others were doing and thinking, can I stay here long? Have I got to catch up now?
They're pure Highlanders. They've got it up here, you know.
Well, cheers.
Good health. Stanjivor.
Stanjivor.
The Hulalana his nest.
What does that mean?
Good health for every day you see and every day you don't.
Okay.
And so to bed. Back in 1800, this would have been the first time in weeks that the drover hadn't spent the night in the heather. But his Phillimore wouldn't have been far away. In the southern Highlands, the mountain ranges run east to west, with precious few gaps between the peaks. One of the few passages through the mountains is Glen Ogle. The early drovers were the pathfinders through here. Their same route was used by military roads in the 18th century, railways in the 19th century, and modern A roads and the National Grid's electricity pylons in the 20th century.
All through the 1700s and the 1800s, the trade in droving grew enormously. It happened because a sort of peace had come to the Highlands. The risings were over, and it meant that the trade in cattle could become a principal export commodity. And then along came the steam engine, and everything changed.
The landscape of the Highlands proved just as difficult for the railways to conquer as it had centuries before for the early drovers. Costly solutions like the Horseshoe Viaduct in Glenfinnan were built to avoid boggy ground, and a series of arches in Glen Ogle was the only way to deal with the near vertical valley walls. But once construction was complete and the connections made through to the south, the steam train completely took over the mass transportation of cattle. The train hasn't run through Glen Ogle for almost 50 years, but the route of the line has been converted for walkers and time-travelling drovers like us, who've reclaimed it. But what with all these horns, I just hope we don't meet any lonely hikers coming the other way today.
The horns are pretty vicious-looking things. Can they do damage with those horns?
Oh yes, definitely. My own father was injured about 35 years ago by a cow. They're worst when they're calving, and they would try and kill you if you start to interfere with the calf too much.
Look in the eye of Sidonia, and suddenly she's going, like that. You know that she means business if she wanted to.
Well, when she gives you the eye,
yeah,
it means that she's not happy about something, and it's time to respect her. Look at the hole in my jacket from the other day. She had enough of me pushing her around, and she just said, "Hey, wait a minute, mister. I'm in control here."
I'm no horseman, but after days of cajoling from Rury, I graduated from the humble foot soldier of this drove and clambered up on Zeno.
See, this is the way to do it. Now I'm a proper cowboy. I've got a horse, and I can get the horse to move the cattle. And as soon as you get up here, you realise what it's all about. Even if you can't do a thing with a horse, suddenly you can do things with a horse. Come on. Oh no, I've left one behind. Look out. Come on, round, 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 round. Round, come on. Come on. Oh, come on, I'll get it. Come on, you see. Come round like this. Round like this. Come on. Come on, let's get the cattle. Come on. Woo! Yippee-yi-oh! Yippee-yi! I see you're completely unmoved by this, Rory.
This is Loch Katrine, tourist hotspot of the Trossachs. But the reason it became so goes back to the drovers' roads, and one drover in particular, and a world-famous author who immortalised him.
We were coming on down through Glen Ogle there by what is known as the Rob Roy Way, and the cattle are now going to continue by truck while I try and find out a bit more about that particular legendary Scotsman.
This steamship has been ferrying tourists up and down this loch for over a century. It's named after Scotland's greatest novelist, for good reason. Born towards the end of the 18th century, Walter Scott was the first English language writer to have a truly international career. His principal subject was the Highlands. Scott transformed people's image of the Highlander from unruly savage into swashbuckling hero. He did this by immortalising the story of a real Highlander, born on the shores of Loch Katrine.
Rob Roy was a cattle drover. He'd been making money by taking cattle from the Highlands and selling them in the lowlands, and he'd been funded by various rich investors. When it all went wrong, they wanted their money back, and he didn't have it.
And so Rob Roy the drover became Rob Roy the cattle rustler. Stealing cattle from the rich clan chiefs, he was rewritten as Rob Roy the Robin Hood of Scotland. Scott was creating a tartan mania. He delivered a romantic version of Highland Scotland that has had some staying power.
Well, we're up on a Scottish dancing holiday.
Are you?
Yes, we walk in the day and then dance at night.
And where are you from then? Where are you based?
We're from Lancashire. File Coast.
You've come from Lancashire to show these Scots up here how to do it properly.
Yes, absolutely.
In a word. Here you are, as Scottish country dancers, steeped in the idea of Scotland and the romance of Scotland. Have you ever read one of Walter Scott's novels?
I'm afraid I haven't, but I will now. No, I've not read them, sorry.
Oh, me neither. No, that's not true. I've read Ivanhoe, and I've read Rob Roy, and I used to read them a little bit when I was a boy, and they are very exciting stories, adventure stories.
The reality was more down to earth. Rob Roy was also known for another practice, demanding money for immunity from raiding. It was called a name that we still use today for extortion: blackmail. Loch Katrine, Roy's birthplace, may seem a romantic name, yet Katrine was no flaxen-haired beauty. Katrine is the anglicised version of the Gaelic word Cataran, which means cattle thief. We've reached the Scottish lowlands. After 150 miles, the land is finally floorboard flat, hence the meandering of the River Forth. Slow-moving though it might be, this river can be deep, and in order to reach Falkirk, the drovers and their cattle had to wade across a shallow section of the river at the ford of Froome.
They're too deep, girls. The current looks pretty strong there too.
So the problem for us is if we took them across, even though we might get one across, they might swim, but when they're swimming, they're suddenly caught by the current, they'll go whooshing down towards Edinburgh, and that's the end of them.
But we don't want to lose one. Come on, get on, come on girls, get out of the water. Come on, Claire, hurry up. Claire, get out of there, come on. Come on, Claire. You've had your swimming.
Go on here.
That's it, good girls. That'll cool your feet down after that long walk as well.
Well, we'll have to look for another way across. And there is one. It's existed since 1500. But drovers were not keen on this alternative. Stirling is gateway to the Highlands and the ancient capital of Scotland. But what we're looking for is Stirling Bridge, which has stood here for 500 years. It afforded a reliable passage across the River Forth, but at a price. A toll was levied from a booth in the middle of the bridge. Those limited profit margins were being eroded once again. From Stirling, it's little more than 10 miles to Falkirk. Nowadays, it's hard to see where you might find space to accommodate 250,000 animals as they once did. But surprisingly, perhaps, the site of the great cattle tryst of the 19th century still exists, tucked away behind the town's quiet residential streets.
Well, we finally made it to Falkirk at the site of the famous tryst. Tryst deriving from the word trust. It's the place where bargains were made and cattle were sold, but it's changed its use now.
By the early 19th century, the biggest cattle droves approaching Falkirk could stretch up to 7 miles in length. 150,000 cattle and 200,000 sheep could change hands in one season. For almost 100 years, Falkirk Tryst was one of the biggest cattle markets on the planet.
At the time of the tryst, huge sums of money passed hands here because this was the market. And it was paid in gold and also often in promissory notes. It was the beginning of the Scottish banking system.
And talking of money, Rory and Cameron have arranged to have their cattle valued. David Leggett is the most respected livestock auctioneer in the country, and we're hoping he's going to put a decent price on the heads of our Highlanders.
Cameron's got a few bits of advice to give me.
Remember and tell him now that the older cow has been producing milk for the last 3 or 4 winters.
Right.
For your own bairns.
For my own bairns?
Aye, for your own bairns. They've got,
Right.
they've got to get something, you know. And
Right.
it's the good milk from the Highland cow that puts the bone into them.
Right. That makes them more tasty, does it?
Yes.
Right. Into my bairns? I'm not trying to sell my bairns, though. I'm trying to sell the cows.
I know, but this is for them to put the price up.
Looking at these, what's your first impression of them?
They're really good. They're very typical of the breeds. Nice long cattle, good ends about them. Remember that nowadays they're beef cattle, whereas in the old days the Highland breed was used for beef and milk. You know, they were house cows.
So today, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How much would you be expecting to pay for this beautiful class?
Well, this one's probably the most valuable one. Probably 2,500. Yeah. Now these two are the same age, but this one's black, as you see. It does have a white underbelly.
Yes.
And that's a great sign of milk. So she would be potentially more maternal, maybe 1,800, 2,000. And I think this is 1,200, 1,500.
Oh.
Yeah, there's quite a difference, isn't there?
And what about Sidonia, the mother? I can tell you that this lovely Sidonia over here has been feeding my own children for the last 4 years, as well as her own calves.
Oh, she's done well then.
Yes, she has, yes. So she's a very good milker.
Right.
Okay. If that, does that influence your choice? Your
Not really. No, not really. No. She's still got a value.
What sort of value are we talking about?
Probably around 1,000. Could 800 on a poor day, maybe 1,200 on a very good day.
What?
No half enough.
It's not half enough. I'm going to have to send Cameron in to deal with you himself later on.
That's between £6,000 and £7,000 for the lot. But David's offer isn't tempting Cameron. Besides, they were never really up for sale. These are the closest Highland cattle ever get to being household pets. But plenty of others are. Sterling Agricultural Centre, one of the biggest livestock auctions in the country, is the nearest thing to the old Falkirk tryst. But today's drovers are truck drivers. They bring livestock from all over the country. But once they've delivered their load, their job is done, and it's over to the men in the white coats. Back in 1800, the drover would have sought out a buyer and negotiated the sale of his cattle himself. Nowadays, auctioneers sell livestock to the highest bidder at the most extraordinary speed. David has invited me onto the podium to see how a livestock auction works. Understanding what the auctioneer is saying is clearly a skill, let alone saying it. Auctioneers get through 60 to 80 lots an hour. £1 million can go under the hammer in a single day. How does he spot the bidders when all they do is nod, or wink, or twitch? Well, I'm going to find out, because they want me to have a go. David is going to show me the cattle he wants me to auction and introduce me to their owner, Ian Bowie.
The three that we're looking at here, what sort of price are you expecting to get them?
Well, I'd be hoping to get near enough £600 for each of them.
Right, 1,800 altogether.
Yes.
And what will you be happy with? What's the minimum you might expect?
I can't remember ever being happy.
No.
But,
595, very fine cattle we're selling today. Let's see them. Let's have a price for 595.
Honestly, this is worse than going on at the parade.
We've got a rather special guest for auctioneer today. Is thinking about a career change in the form of Griff Rhys Jones. So I'm going to hand you over to Griff here, who'll do the sale. Where are you, auctioneer? Right, here I am.
Thank you very much, David. Let me just check that. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're looking at 3 Highland steer here. Can we have them? Can we show them, please? Thank you very much. Beautiful cattle, the property of Mr. Ian Bowie of Little Carbeth Farm, weighing in at 390 kilograms. 390 kilograms. Let's 600. I'm looking for 600, 550, 550, 500. 500. I'm looking for 500, 500, looking for 510, 510, 520, 530, 540, 550, 560, 570, 580, 590, 600, 610, 610, sir. 610 going once, 610. Any more bids? 610. 610, are you going to come again, sir? 615, any bids at 615, going 610. One, twice. So,
Mr. Govere.
Mr. Govere, thank you very much. 610. Good. Now 2 African male elephants.
We have one final stop on our journey through the drovers' roads of the past. 30 miles north of Falkirk, Griff was the site of the first major cattle tryst in Scotland. But by 1770, the rise in the demand for beef from London and the Midlands forced the business further south. In recent years, Griff has celebrated its historic associations by holding an annual tryst festival, with a market selling all manner of cow-related novelties, a series of talks and drovers' walks for the bovine enthusiast, and even a quiz night devoted entirely to beef.
I don't feel a proper drover, I must admit, coming from Fitzrovia as I do. But it's an interesting comment, isn't it, really, that people have turned out to see this and to celebrate it. They've loved it.
Whereas once this town would have had so many cattle passing through it every year that it would have been a matter of almost complete indifference.
No festival can end without a ceilidh, and so we've penned Sidonia and the girls out in the courtyard. The extraordinary end to this story has still to be told. The thousands of Scottish cattle-rearing Highlanders that were forced to emigrate to America in the 18th and 19th centuries because of the Highland clearances went on to become the pioneers of early America. The Scottish drovers in particular adapted their acquired skills of herding and living in the wild, husbandry, gunmanship, and even the music they played around the campfire to become the original cowboys. Musician Brian McNeill has studied the crossovers between Scottish folk tunes and the music of the early American Wild West.
I think the first generation of Scots who went over after the clearances, they took the music with them, and you know, one of the tunes that interests me, very well known pipe march here, but when I played it to my friend way down in West Virginia, and he said to me, "What's the name of that?" And I said, "It's called Campbell's Farewell to Redcastle." And he said, "No, it's not." He said, "It's called Campbell's Farewell to Red Gap."
Play it for me now, play it for me now.
This is the Scottish version.
Right.
Now, here's the American version. In the 20th century, legendary Scottish Americans like Chisholm, MacTaggart, Quick Draw McGraw and the James Brothers became the stars of a whole new culture, the Hollywood Western. We've travelled over 200 miles and gone back in time as many years. In the process, we've been privileged to see how demanding cattle droving really was, but also how droving pioneered a series of routes through this difficult and challenging landscape that still form the foundation of the roads of Scotland today.
It's astonishing that we made a journey not just across the Highlands, but sort of into the Highlands as well. All those things that Walter Scott made popular and famous across the world, like the water of life, whiskey, like black pudding, like kilts and shortbread and tartan, even Scotch beef, owe their existence to a culture that was based upon raising, nurturing and selling cattle.
For next time, Griff's on a Welsh pilgrimage. That's next Wednesday night at 7. Drama tonight on BBC One, Jenny encounters a darker side to life in Call the Midwife next. A revolution in our eating habits on BBC Two, The Men Who Made Us Fat. Well, on BBC Four now, Dan Cruikshank explores the secret lives of the bridges that built London.